The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 in the morning, just like it had for the past 3 months. Amy rolled over and hit the snooze button, her body aching from yesterday's double shift. 5 more minutes, she told herself. But she knew she couldn't afford those 5 minutes. Every second counted when you were trying to save a life. She dragged herself out of the creaky bed and tiptoed across the small apartment, careful not to wake Grace, her 7-year-old daughter who was still sleeping peacefully in the next room. Amy paused at Grace's doorway and watched her little girl's chest rise and fall. The sight both warmed her heart and broke it at the same time. Grace looked so peaceful, so normal, but Amy knew better. She knew about the condition that was slowly stealing her daughter's strength. The one that would need surgery soon if Grace was going to have a normal childhood. The bathroom mirror showed a tired woman who looked older than her 28 years. Dark circles under her eyes, hair that needed a good cut, hands that were rough from washing dishes and wiping down tables. Amy splashed cold water on her face and tried to shake off the exhaustion. She had work to do. Murphy's Diner sat on the corner of Main Street and 5th Avenue, a place that had been serving the same coffee and eggs for 30 years. Amy had been working there for 2 years now, but these last 3 months had been different. These last 3 months she'd been working every shift she could get her hands on. Morning shift, afternoon shift, sometimes both in the same day. Her manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been understanding about Amy's situation, but there were only so many hours in a day. The early morning crowd was always the same. Construction workers grabbing coffee before their shifts, nurses coming off the night shift at the hospital, a few truck drivers passing through town. Amy knew most of their orders by heart. Black coffee for Joe the electrician, coffee with 2 sugars and extra cream for Linda from the hospital, pancakes and bacon for Mike, who drove trucks cross-country. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her smile genuine despite the weight on her shoulders. These people weren't just customers to Amy. They were neighbors, friends, people who asked about Grace and meant it when they said they hoped she was doing well. When Mrs. Patterson from down the street left an extra $1 tip with a note saying for Grace's medicine, Amy had to step into the kitchen for a moment to collect herself. But tips were unpredictable. Some days were good, some days were not so good. Amy had learned to budget for the worst and hope for the best. She kept a small notebook in her apron pocket where she wrote down every dollar she made. At the end of each day, she'd count her tips and add them to the growing pile of bills and coins in the coffee can on her kitchen counter. The can that held Grace's future. The surgery they needed would cost $18,000. Their insurance would cover some of it, but not enough. Not nearly enough. Amy had been making payments to the hospital, small amounts that barely made a dent, but it was all she could manage. The doctors had been patient so far, but they'd made it clear that Grace couldn't wait much longer. The condition was getting worse, and every month they delayed made the surgery more complicated. Amy had tried everything. She'd applied for assistance programs, reached out to charities, even started a small fundraiser at Grace's school. Every dollar helped, but it felt like trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon. Some nights after Grace was asleep, Amy would sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills, trying to figure out how to make the impossible math work. She'd sold everything she could. Her grandmother's jewelry, the furniture they didn't absolutely need, even her car. Now they took the bus everywhere, which meant Amy had to leave extra early for work and got home later than she wanted. Grace never complained, though. She was such a good kid, so understanding for her age. When Amy explained that they had to sell the car, Grace had just nodded and said, "It's okay. Mama, the bus is kind of fun anyway." The lunch crowd was picking up, and Amy moved faster, refilling coffee cups and taking orders. Her feet hurt in the cheap shoes she'd bought at the discount store, but she couldn't afford better ones. Every dollar that didn't go toward rent, food, or Grace's medical fund felt like money stolen from her daughter's future. Between orders, Amy would think about the meeting with Grace's doctor next week. Dr. Williams had been clear about the timeline. They needed to schedule the surgery within the next 2 months, or Grace's condition would become much more serious. Amy had $2,800 in the coffee can at home. She was getting closer, but not close enough, not fast enough. The afternoon brought its own challenges. The after-school crowd included some teenagers who didn't always tip well, families with young children who made big messes, business people in a hurry who sometimes forgot to leave anything extra. Amy served them all with the same smile, the same attention to detail. She couldn't afford to have favorites when it came to her income. One regular customer, Mrs. Chen, had noticed Amy's extra shifts and asked if everything was okay. Amy had shared a little about Grace's situation, and the next day Mrs. Chen had brought in an envelope with $50 inside. "For Grace," she'd said simply. Amy had almost cried right there at the table. These small kindnesses kept Amy going when the exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. They reminded her that she wasn't alone, even when it felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. Every smile from a customer, every thank you and have a good day, was fuel for another day of fighting for her daughter's health. As her double shift ended and Amy counted her tips for the day, she allowed herself a moment of hope. $28 in tips plus her hourly wage. It wasn't enough to solve everything, but it was something. It was progress, $1 at a time toward the surgery that would give Grace the normal, healthy childhood she deserved. Walking to the bus stop in the evening light, Amy's feet ached and her back was sore, but her heart was full of determination. Tomorrow would bring another day of work, another chance to get closer to that magic number, another day of showing Grace that when life gets tough, you don't give up. You keep serving coffee, you keep smiling, and you keep believing that somehow, everything will work out. It was a Thursday morning when the rain was coming down so hard that the windows of Murphy's diner were completely fogged up. Amy was wiping down tables when she heard the little bell above the door ring. She looked up to see an old man standing in the doorway, shaking water off an umbrella that had seen better days. He was probably in his early 80s with thin gray hair that was slightly damp despite the umbrella. His clothes weren't fancy at all. A simple brown jacket that looked like it came from a department store, dark pants that were a little too long, and shoes that were clean but obviously old, the kind of shoes that had been resoled more than once. The old man stood there for a moment looking around the diner like he was trying to decide where to sit. Amy grabbed a menu and walked over with her usual warm smile. "Good morning," she said. "Pretty nasty weather out there, isn't it?" He nodded and gave her a small smile back. "Yes, it certainly is." His voice was quiet, polite. "Could I get a table, please?" "Of course. Anywhere you'd like." Amy gestured toward the dining room. He chose a corner booth, the one by the window where he could watch the rain and the people hurrying by with their umbrellas. Amy set the menu down in front of him and pulled out her notepad. "Can I start you off with some coffee to warm you up?" "That would be wonderful." "Black coffee, please." Amy poured his coffee from the fresh pot she'd just made. The old man wrapped his hands around the mug like he was trying to warm them up. She noticed his hands were weathered but clean, with calluses that suggested he'd worked with them at some point in his life. "Take your time with the menu," Amy said. "I'll be right here if you need anything." She went back to her other customers but found herself glancing over at the corner booth. There was something about the old man that caught her attention. Not in a bad way. He just seemed so quiet, so careful with everything he did. The way he held his coffee cup, the way he looked out the window, even the way he sat, like he was used to not taking up too much space in the world. When she came back to take his order, he asked for just one piece of apple pie. "That's all?" Amy asked gently. "We've got some great pancakes this morning, or eggs if you'd prefer something more filling." He shook his head. "Just the pie, thank you. It looks very good." Amy brought him the biggest piece they had with a little extra whipped cream on top. When she set it down, she saw his eyes light up just a little. "This looks delicious," he said. "Thank you very much." The old man ate slowly, savoring each bite. Amy noticed he finished every last crumb, and even used his fork to get the remaining whipped cream. When she brought him the check, he counted out exact change from a small leather wallet that was almost as old as he was. "Thank you for the wonderful service," he said as he prepared to leave. "I'll see you again soon." Amy thought that was just something people said, but she was wrong. 3 days later, on Sunday morning, there he was again. Same corner booth, same black coffee, same quiet politeness. This time he ordered oatmeal with brown sugar. "Back again," Amy said with a smile as she poured his coffee. "I hope that's all right," he said, almost apologetically. "Of course it's all right. That's what we're here for." As the weeks went by, the old man became a regular part of Amy's routine. He came in 3 times a week, always Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. Always the same booth, always black coffee and something simple to eat. Sometimes pie, sometimes oatmeal, occasionally scrambled eggs with toast. Amy learned his name was Walter, though he never offered his last name, and she never asked. He was always polite to everyone, But Amy noticed that other customers barely seemed to see him. He was just an old man in old clothes, the kind of person who blended into the background of most people's busy lives. But Amy saw him. She always made sure his coffee cup stayed full, and she'd stop by his table to chat when things were slow. They'd talk about simple things. The weather, how good the pie was that day, whether the rain would let up. Walter never talked about himself much, but he was a good listener. He'd ask Amy how her day was going, and she could tell he actually cared about the answer. "You're very kind to an old man," he told her one Thursday morning. "You're not that old," Amy said with a laugh. "And besides, kindness doesn't cost anything." Walter smiled at that. It was the biggest smile she'd seen from him yet. Amy started to look forward to Walter's visits. In a job where so many customers were in a hurry, rushing through their meals and barely looking up from their phones, Walter was different. He was present. He noticed things. When Amy mentioned that her daughter had drawn a picture at school, Walter asked to see it. Amy showed him Grace's drawing of a rainbow, and Walter studied it carefully. "She's very talented," he said. "You must be proud." Amy was proud. And it meant something that Walter took the time to really look at Grace's artwork, instead of just glancing and saying, "That's nice," like most people did. She noticed other things about Walter, too. His clothes were old, but they were always clean and pressed. His shoes might have been worn, but they were polished. He carried himself with a dignity that had nothing to do with money. When he paid his check, he always left exactly 15% as a tip, calculated to the penny. The other waitresses started to recognize him too, but Amy was clearly his favorite. When she was on her day off and Lisa was working, Walter would ask when Amy would be back. He never complained about other servers, but it was obvious he preferred Amy's company. "Your old man was asking for you yesterday," Lisa mentioned one morning. "He's not my old man," Amy laughed. "He's just a sweet customer." "Well, he sure likes you. Barely said 2 words to me, but I bet he would have talked your ear off." Amy realized that was probably true. Walter was quiet with most people, but he'd started to open up with her. He told her about watching the birds that came to the feeder outside his apartment window. He mentioned that he used to have a garden but couldn't manage one anymore. Small details about his life that painted a picture of a man who lived simply and quietly. There was something about Walter that made Amy curious, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Maybe it was the way he sometimes looked like he wanted to say more than he did, or the way he seemed to be studying people, watching how they treated each other, like he was looking for something specific, though Amy couldn't imagine what that might be. What Amy did know was that Walter had become more than just a customer. In a small way, he'd become part of her life, someone she genuinely cared about and looked forward to seeing, someone who treated her with respect and kindness, which meant more to her than he probably realized. Little did Amy know that Walter was watching her too, and seeing something in her kindness that would soon change both of their lives forever. It had been 6 weeks since Walter first walked through the doors of Murphy's Diner, and Amy had gotten used to his routine. Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday like clockwork. She'd even started saving him the corner booth when she saw him walking down the street with that old umbrella of his. This particular Tuesday started off busier than usual. The morning rush seemed to go on forever, with coffee orders backing up and the kitchen running behind. Amy was moving between tables like she was dancing, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups while keeping track of 6 different conversations. But even in all the chaos, she noticed when Walter came in, he looked a little different today. Maybe more tired than usual, or perhaps distracted. Amy caught his eye and pointed toward his usual booth, mouthing, "Be right there," as she delivered pancakes to table 4. Walter nodded and made his way to the corner, settling into his spot by the window. When Amy finally made it over with the coffee pot, Walter seemed to be staring out at the street more than usual. It was one of those gray November days when the sky looked like it was thinking about rain but couldn't quite make up its mind. "Sorry about the wait," Amy said, pouring his coffee. "Crazy morning." "No problem at all," Walter replied, but his usual small smile wasn't quite there. "I was just watching the people go by." "Everyone always seems to be in such a hurry." Amy glanced out the window. Walter was right. People were walking fast, heads down, focused on getting wherever they were going. No one was taking time to look around or enjoy the day, even if it was a gray one. "They are in a hurry," Amy agreed. "Sometimes I think they forget that slowing down isn't always a bad thing." Walter looked up at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that looked almost sad. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think you're right about that." Amy wanted to ask if everything was okay, but the bell above the door was ringing again, and she had new customers to seat. "I'll be back in a few minutes to get your order," she told Walter. The morning continued to be hectic, but Amy kept glancing over at Walter's booth. He seemed lost in thought, occasionally sipping his coffee, but mostly just looking out the window. When she finally made it back to take his order, he asked for his usual: scrambled eggs with wheat toast and a side of fruit. "Coming right up," Amy said. As she turned to go, Walter called her back. "Amy," he said, and something in his voice made her stop. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For always being so kind. For treating me like I matter." The words caught Amy off guard. There was something so genuine, so heartfelt in the way he said it, that she felt a little flutter in her chest. "Of course you matter," she said softly. "Everyone matters." Walter nodded, but she could see tears starting to form in the corners of his eyes. Not everyone sees it that way. Amy wanted to sit down and ask what was wrong, but the kitchen was calling out orders, and she had 3 other tables waiting for their checks. "I'll be right back with your breakfast," she promised. The eggs and toast came out perfectly, and Amy made sure to add extra strawberries to Walter's fruit cup. When she set the plate down in front of him, he looked up at her with such gratitude that she had to blink back tears of her own. "This looks wonderful," he said. "Thank you." Amy watched from behind the counter as Walter ate his breakfast. He seemed to be savoring every bite, like he was trying to remember the taste of everything. It reminded her of how Grace ate ice cream, slowly and carefully, making each spoonful last as long as possible. The lunch crowd was starting to filter in when Walter finished eating. Amy saw him pat his jacket pockets, then check his pants pockets. Then he did it again, more frantically this time. His face went pale, and Amy could see him getting upset. She walked over with his check, already knowing what was wrong before he said anything. "Amy." Walter's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I think I left my wallet at home." He looked absolutely mortified. His hands were shaking slightly as he continued to search through his pockets, even though they both knew the wallet wasn't there. "I'm so embarrassed," he continued, his voice getting quieter. "This has never happened to me before. I must have set it down when I was organizing my pills this morning and forgot to pick it back up." Amy looked at the check in her hand. $12.37. She looked at Walter, who was staring down at the table like he wanted to disappear, and her heart just broke for him. Without even thinking about it, Amy reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her tip money from the morning. She had made $34 in tips so far, mostly crumpled 1s and 5s that customers had left on tables. It wasn't much, but it was supposed to go toward Grace's surgery fund like every other dollar she made. "Don't worry about it, Mr. Walter," she said, peeling off the money to cover his bill. "It's my treat today." Walter looked up at her with shock. "Oh no, I couldn't. I can't let you do that." "It's already done," Amy said with a smile, putting the money in her pocket with the check. "Besides, everyone forgets their wallet sometimes." "But I know you work hard for your money," Walter protested. "I see how much you care about every customer, how many hours you work. I can't take your tips." Amy was touched that he'd noticed how hard she worked. Most customers never paid attention to things like that. "Listen," she said, sitting down across from him for a moment. "When I was Grace's age, my mom was a waitress too. One time she took me out for ice cream and realized she'd forgotten her purse. The man behind the counter told us not to worry about it and gave us the ice cream anyway. I never forgot how that made me feel." Walter was listening intently, and Amy could see his eyes getting misty again. "My mom always said that kindness is like throwing a pebble in a pond," Amy continued. "The ripples spread out farther than you can see." Maybe that man never knew that his kindness to a little girl and her mom made them both believe that the world was full of good people. "Amy," Walter said, his voice thick with emotion. "So don't worry about the $12, Amy said, standing up. "Just promise me you'll pay it forward someday when someone else needs help." Walter stood up too, and for a moment Amy thought he might hug her. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand in both of his. "You have no idea," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "how much this means to me, how much you mean to me." Amy felt tears starting to form in her own eyes. There was something so profound about this moment, something that felt bigger than just paying for a breakfast check. Everyone deserves kindness, she said simply. Everyone deserves to be treated like they matter. Walter nodded, squeezing her hand gently before letting go. I'll never forget this, he said. Never. As Amy watched Walter walk out of the diner and disappear down the street, she had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. She just knew that she'd done the right thing, and sometimes that's all that matters. The next morning, Amy woke up with that same familiar weight in her chest. She'd been thinking about Walter all night, wondering if he was okay, if he'd gotten home safely without his wallet. She'd even worried that maybe he didn't have money for groceries or medicine. The thought of that sweet old man going without something he needed because of a simple mistake made her stomach hurt. She got dressed in the dark, kissed Grace goodbye as she slept, and headed out to catch the early bus to work. The November air was crisp and cold, and Amy pulled her jacket tighter as she walked toward the bus stop. She couldn't stop thinking about the look in Walter's eyes yesterday when he'd thanked her. There had been something so deep about it, like her small act of kindness had meant more to him than she could understand. As the bus rounded the corner toward Murphy's Diner, Amy looked out the window to check if any of the early customers were already waiting outside. That's when she saw them. Two men in expensive-looking dark suits standing next to a shiny black car parked right in front of the diner. Even from the bus window, Amy could tell these weren't regular customers. They looked completely out of place in this part of town. Amy's first thought was that something bad had happened. Maybe there'd been a break-in or someone had gotten hurt. Her heart started beating faster as she got off the bus and walked toward the diner. The two men noticed her approaching and started walking toward her. "Excuse me," the taller one called out. "Are you Amy?" Amy stopped walking. How did these strangers know her name? She looked around, suddenly feeling very alone on the empty street. "Who wants to know?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The shorter man stepped forward and reached into his jacket. Amy's heart nearly stopped, but he only pulled out a business card and what looked like official papers. "My name is Robert Chen, and this is my colleague David Martinez. We're attorneys." He handed Amy the business card. "We're here on behalf of our client, Walter Peterson." Amy looked down at the card. The letterhead was fancy with gold lettering that read, "Chen, Martinez and Associates, Corporate Law." She'd never seen anything so official looking in her life. "Walter?" Amy's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Is he okay? Did something happen to him?" The two lawyers looked at each other, and Amy saw something pass between them, like they were sharing a secret. "Mr. Peterson is fine," David Martinez said, "but we need to talk to you about what happened yesterday. Is there somewhere private we can speak?" Amy's mind was racing. How did these lawyers know about yesterday? How did they even know about Walter? And why were they looking for her? Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't due to arrive for another 30 minutes, but Amy had a key. She unlocked the diner and turned on the lights, gesturing for the men to follow her inside. They chose a booth near the back, and Amy sat across from them, her hands shaking slightly. "Amy," Robert Chen began, opening a folder filled with papers. "What we're about to tell you might come as a shock." "You're scaring me," Amy said honestly. "Please just tell me what's going on." David Martinez leaned forward. "The man you know as Walter. His full name is Walter Peterson. Walter Peterson III, to be exact." Amy blinked. "Okay, Amy," Robert Chen said gently. "Walter Peterson is the founder and chief executive officer of Peterson Industries. Perhaps you've heard of it?" Amy felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Peterson Industries? She'd heard of it, all right. Everyone had heard of it. It was one of the biggest companies in the country. They made everything from household appliances to computer parts. Their logo was on half the things in her apartment. "That's impossible," Amy whispered. "Walter is he's just a regular old man. He orders scrambled eggs and pays with exact change from an old wallet." The lawyers exchanged that look again. "Amy," David Martinez said, "Walter Peterson is worth approximately $3.2 billion. The words hit Amy like a physical blow. She actually felt dizzy. "Billion?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. "With a B?" "With a B," Robert Chen confirmed. Amy stared at them, waiting for them to laugh and tell her this was some kind of joke. But they weren't laughing. They were completely serious, but why? Amy's voice trailed off. Nothing was making sense. Why would someone with that much money eat at a place like Murphy's Diner? Why would he dress like? Why would he act like a regular person? David Martinez finished for her. "That's exactly why we're here." Robert Chen opened his folder and pulled out several photographs. They were pictures of Walter, but not the Walter that Amy knew. In these pictures, he was wearing expensive suits and standing behind podiums, shaking hands with people Amy recognized from television. Politicians, celebrities, other business leaders. For the past 2 years, Robert Chen explained, Mr. Peterson has been conducting what he calls his humanity project. He goes to small businesses, diners, coffee shops, places where regular people work and eat. He dresses simply, acts humble, and observes how people treat him when they think he's just another poor old man. Amy felt like she was in a dream. A very strange, confusing dream. He's been doing this all over the country, David Martinez continued. Testing people's character, seeing who shows kindness to someone they think can't do anything for them in return. Testing people? Amy repeated. Not in a cruel way, Robert Chen said quickly, seeing the look on Amy's face. Mr. Peterson genuinely believes that how we treat the least fortunate among us says everything about who we really are as human beings. Amy thought about all the times she'd chatted with Walter, brought him extra whipped cream on his pie, made sure his coffee cup never went empty. She'd done those things because she liked him, because he seemed lonely, because it was the right thing to do, not because she thought he might be rich. Yesterday, David Martinez said, when you paid for his breakfast with your own tip money, you had no idea who he was. You saw an embarrassed old man who needed help and you helped him without hesitation. Anyone would have done the same thing. Amy said weakly. That's where you're wrong, Robert Chen said. In the past 2 years, Mr. Peterson has visited over 300 establishments. Do you know how many people have ever paid for his meal when he forgot his wallet? Amy shook her head. Including you, the number is 4. Amy felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She didn't know if she wanted to cry or scream or run away from this impossible conversation. Amy, David Martinez said softly, Mr. Peterson was so moved by your kindness that he spent the entire night awake, thinking about what you'd said to him, about kindness spreading like ripples in a pond, about how everyone deserves to be treated like they matter. Robert Chen reached into his folder again and pulled out an envelope. Amy's name was written on the front in handwriting she recognized as Walter's. He asked us to give you this, Robert Chen said, sliding the envelope across the table. And to tell you that in all his years of life, in all his business dealings and charity work, he has never met anyone who embodied the spirit of true generosity the way you do. Amy stared at the envelope, too shocked to reach for it. Yesterday, she'd been worried about a $12 breakfast check. Now she was being told that the quiet old man she'd helped was one of the richest people in America. This can't be real, she whispered, but deep down she was starting to believe it was. Amy stared at the envelope on the table like it might explode if she touched it. Her hands were shaking, and she couldn't seem to make them stop. The 2 lawyers sat quietly, watching her with expressions that seemed both professional and genuinely kind. I don't understand, Amy said for the 3rd time. This has to be some kind of mistake. There's no mistake, Robert Chen said gently. Mr. Peterson was very specific about everything he wanted us to tell you and give you. David Martinez leaned forward. Amy, would you like us to step outside while you read the letter? This is obviously very personal. Amy shook her head. She was too scared to be alone right now. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this moment. She picked up the envelope with trembling fingers and slowly opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter in Walter's careful script, and beneath it something that made her gasp out loud. It was a check with more zeros on it than Amy had ever seen in her entire life. $100,000, made out to her, signed by Walter Peterson III. Oh my God, Amy whispered, her voice barely audible. Oh my God, this can't be real. The letter was written in the same quiet, thoughtful voice she'd come to know over the past 6 weeks. Dear Amy, I have lived 82 years on this earth, and I have been blessed with more wealth than any one person could ever need. But yesterday, when you paid for my breakfast with money you needed for your daughter's medical care, you gave me something I had been searching for everywhere, proof that true goodness still exists in this world. You treated me with kindness when you thought I was nobody special. You saw me as a human being worthy of respect and care. In a world where so many people judge others by their clothes, their cars, or their bank accounts, you judged me by nothing except whether I needed help. The money in this envelope is not charity. Amy, it is a thank you gift from one human being to another. You showed me that the world is still full of people who believe that everyone matters, and that lesson is worth more to me than every dollar I've ever earned." Amy had to stop reading because the tears were making it impossible to see the words clearly. When she looked up, both lawyers were watching her with understanding expressions. "There's more," David Martinez said softly. Amy wiped her eyes and continued reading. "I know you have been working double shifts to save money for Grace's surgery. Please use this money to get her the best medical care available. I have also arranged for Grace to be seen by Dr. Rebecca Williams at Children's Medical Center downtown. Dr. Williams is the best pediatric surgeon in the country, and she is expecting your call. But Amy, I want to offer you something else as well. I am starting a new foundation called the Ripple Effect Foundation, dedicated to helping people who help others. I would be honored if you would consider becoming the foundation's first director of community outreach. The position comes with a salary that would allow you to provide for Grace while also helping other families in situations similar to yours. You told me that kindness spreads like ripples in a pond. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure those ripples reach as far as possible. With all my gratitude and respect, Walter." Amy finished reading and sat in complete silence for a long moment. The diner around her seemed unreal, like she was sitting in a movie set instead of the place where she'd worked for 2 years. "The foundation job," she finally said, "is that real too?" "Very real," Robert Chen confirmed. "The salary is $85,000 a year, plus full health insurance and benefits. Mr. Peterson has already rented office space and begun setting up the foundation's operations." Amy felt like she was going to faint. Yesterday, she had been a waitress struggling to pay for her daughter's surgery. Today, she was being offered a check for more money than she'd ever imagined having, plus a job that paid more than 4 times what she made at the diner. "There's one more thing," David Martinez said. "Mr. Peterson would very much like to meet with you and Grace if you're willing. He wants to apologize for not being honest about who he was, and he wants to meet the daughter of the woman who restored his faith in humanity." 2 days later, Amy found herself standing in the lobby of the Peterson Industries building downtown, holding Grace's hand and trying not to feel overwhelmed by the marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and business people in expensive suits walking purposefully through the massive space. Walter appeared at the elevator, and Amy almost didn't recognize him. He was wearing a well-tailored dark blue suit and looked every inch the successful businessman. But when he saw Amy and Grace, his face lit up with the same gentle smile she'd come to know at the diner. "Amy," he said, walking toward them with his arms slightly outstretched. "I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see you again." Amy found herself being hugged by a billionaire, and somehow it felt exactly the same as being hugged by the quiet old man who'd sat in the corner booth at Murphy's Diner. "Grace," Walter said, kneeling down to Grace's eye level, "I've heard so much about you. Your mama is very proud of you, you know." Grace, who had been unusually quiet since Amy explained that the nice man from Mama's work wanted to meet her, looked up at Walter with curious eyes. "Are you really super rich?" Grace asked with the directness that only 7-year-olds can manage. Walter laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that echoed through the marble lobby. "I suppose I am," he said. "But do you know what makes someone truly rich, Grace?" Grace shook her head. "Having people in your life who care about you. People like your mama who work so hard to take care of you. That's the most valuable thing in the world." During their meeting in Walter's office, Amy learned more about his plan. The Ripple Effect Foundation would identify and help people who were struggling, but still found ways to help others. Single parents, elderly people living alone, families dealing with medical bills, anyone who needed support but was too proud or too busy helping others to ask for it. "You inspired this, Amy," Walter said as they looked out the window at the city below. "Your kindness to a stranger reminded me why I went into business in the first place. Not to make money, but to make the world a little bit better." 6 months later, Amy was settling into her new office at the Ripple Effect Foundation when she got a call from a waitress in Phoenix. The woman had heard about the foundation through a friend and wanted to nominate her coworker, a single dad who had been secretly paying for elderly customers' meals when they came up short on money. As Amy wrote down the details, she thought about what Walter had said about ripples in a pond. Grace was healthy now, fully recovered from her surgery and back to being a normal, energetic 7-year-old. Amy had a job she loved, helping people who reminded her of herself just a few months ago. But the most amazing thing was how many stories of kindness had started reaching the foundation. People helping people, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because they believed, like Amy had always believed, that everyone deserves to be treated like they matter. Walter had been right. Kindness really did spread like ripples in a pond, reaching farther than anyone could imagine. And it all started with a cup of coffee and a $12 breakfast check that a waitress paid because she thought an old man needed help. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves of all.